Dr. Michael Youssef, it's an absolute honour and a real privilege to have the opportunity to interview you here today for Revelation TV in central London. Your ministry, Leading the Way, has brought millions to Christ and has brought so much hope to so many people and really guided them through biblical truth. And so thank you for what you do, and also thank you for the impact that you've had on my life, listening to many of your sermons on YouTube and through Leading the Way, that I've learned so much.
Thank you, Simon.
And your ministry is so important, critical in these last days. But can you share with us how your journey began? You were born in 1948, the same year that the nation of Israel was reborn in Egypt. Yeah. What was life like growing up in Egypt?
Well, thank you, Simon. Good to be with you. And it is a privilege and an honor to name the name of the Lord and lift up the Word of God on a continuous basis around the world. I grew up in Egypt the first 18 years of my life. I'm almost 19 before I left, and literally escaped from the country with the clothes on my back. I was supposed to be aborted because my mother's ill health, but our pastor, the pastor of my parents, saw a vision, and literally within hours before the surgery, he knocked on their door, and my parents just took it as a word from God, and they just let the pregnancy go through. And so I'm grateful to be alive. And then God supernaturally have worked in my life ever since, even in the time of rebellion, which I did experience several years of rebellion in my teen years, because when I heard the story, I said, no, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be in ministry. All my older siblings, I'm number 7,
wow,
were very successful. So one was 19 years older than me, one 17 years older than me, and they were all extremely successful bankers and business. And my dad was in business, in the oil business, and so I was not going to be the kind of black sheep in the family and go to ministry. Now, we have no ministry people in our family, but God supernaturally, in a marvelous way, brought me to Himself, and then began to really develop a lot of supernatural interventions that cannot be described any other way. In fact, I wrote a book about the story of my life called Trust and Obey. One of my pastor's colleagues who worked with me, he said to me, he said, your story, and I haven't worked with you for 15 years, it just summarized in 2 words, trust and obey. You have constantly trusted God and obeyed Him, and He did the rest. And so that's really the summary of my life. Moved to Australia, where I met my wife and were married 47 years ago. And then we, after seminary and training and ordination and serving in a church in Sydney, we moved to California, from California to Atlanta, where I headed up an organization called Haggai Institute for Leadership Training. And then God laid it on my heart in 1986 to start a congregation. I did not know the first thing about planting a church. It's the absolute truth. I knew nothing. And so I said, Lord, is that really you? And but I always knew that He specializes in using the unlikely people. So I listened very carefully, and I just told a few friends. They said, hey, we're going to be in room X, Y, and Z in hotel X, Y, and Z on Sunday at 10 o'clock. And 28 adults, 16 children showed up. And nice. That was our first service 31 years ago last week. And we immediately began to grow and moved to a private school, and we were there for 6 years. And then God really gave us one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. In fact, the architect and the builder have won the Architect Digest Award for the most unique church building in 50 years in America.
Wow, that's incredible.
And it's really gained, and both deserve it because they did a great job. And so here we are, 31 years later. Church has gone through all kinds of metamorphoses, but we keep on growing and we keep on flourishing. 1 year after the founding of the church, a member of my church, he now went to be with the Lord, kept harping at me. And I'm really saying not just harping. And he will take me to lunch, and he said, you need to be in the media, you need to be on radio, you need to be. And I said, Bill, there are a lot of Christian radio preachers. And he said, yes, but they're Baptists, they're Pentecostals, but nobody really hears the gospel in its purity from mainline denominational pastor. And so we launched on radio, and from there, 12 years later, we launched on television. Again, it's a vision of another man who came and said, God told me to give you my television ministry. And so every step of the way, God is the one who opened the door, and his small voice says, walk ye in it, and I walked in it. And I am not one of those people, and I thank God for them who have that kind of vision, develop a vision and come in and say, God, I want to do this, or even feel God called them to do this. I'm not. I mean, God had to drag me in some instance, kicking and screaming. But I also trusted his voice and tried to be as obedient as I know how. And so the expansion of the ministry around the world, every step of the way. I'll give you one example.
Yeah, please do.
Of that supernatural intervention of God. I was in Cairo doing a crusade. It was a city. I mean, it was a nationwide by satellites, and hundreds of locations around the country. But I'm preaching in Cairo, and then I had to meet with a convert, prominent man, but he had to meet privately with me and ask me questions which indicated to me that there is a desperate need for Bible teaching and preaching and apologetics, a channel that is dedicated to just do that, not pre-evangelism, but just specifically gospel channel. So 2004. And I prayed, I said, Lord, this is a big thing. You've got to really show me that this is your thing and not my idea. And we didn't launch until 2009. So those 5 years, I prayed, I fasted, I sought the mind of God. I sought the advice of good counsel, particularly Christian leaders in the Middle East. I sent 2 of my colleagues to make a tour and meet with specific people that I have known through the years, leaders. And they came back, they said, every one of them said there is a desperate need for that. And so I said, Lord, one more thing, just show me tangibly. And I get a phone call from an old friend of mine. I've known him for many years. He lives in Nebraska, in the United States. And he calls me one morning and he said, are you okay? I said, I'm fine. He said, your health is okay. I said, my health, thank God, I'm doing great. Your family okay? And I said, what's going on? He said, well, Lord kept me awake all night and disturbed my sleep about you and what is going on. I said, well, here's something you can pray about. God laid this heavy burden on me to start a television channel, and I'm asking God to show me a tangible sign that I need to do this. He said, okay, I know exactly what that is, because God, that's part of where God woke me up. He told me to sell my farm and give you $1 million.
Amazing.
And that's exactly what we needed to launch the channel. Because it's 24/7. I mean, it's like you know what it's like.
Absolutely,
running a television station.
I don't run my bosses run the station, but I can imagine
sure.
from the pressure
yeah.
and the constant need for content,
yeah.
And also to make informative and engaging programs that
exactly.
people watch.
Yeah, I have November. We launched on March 2009. November 2008, 2 of my colleagues who were responsible for this came to me to see me, and they said, "Can we appeal to you, please, to forget about it?" And I said, why? I mean, God already placed all the pieces together. They said, you don't understand, 24/7, that's a beast that's going to be gobbling every program. And I said to one of my colleagues, he's actually from Egypt, and a wonderful man, I said, Magid, I said, the day is going to come when you're going to have people knocking on your door and said, please, I have programs, God-centered programs, Christ-centered programs, can you put them on the air? He said, well, we can't find enough. I said, now, but you wait. And that's exactly what he tells that to everybody. Everywhere he goes, he said, now we have 53 producers, programmers, who are Arabic speaking.
Amazing.
And we have handpicked about 12 Westerners whom we translate their material into Arabic, that I believed in my heart, God called me to each one of them, allow us to have their material, they will have relevant material, including Colin Dye from KT. He's been broadcasting, and many times he said, I never thought that my ministry can be expanded into millions. And other people in the United States, David Jeremiah and a few others that I personally called on the phone. I said, I want to translate your material into Arabic. We have an amazing audience from North Africa to the Middle East to the Gulf states to actually to England. I have a doctor friend of mine in Liverpool who said he has the kingdom sat on his television, and he owns a hospital there in Liverpool. They're running around the whole time. So God has done it all, and I am just glad to be sitting in the passenger seat going for the ride.
Fantastic. Michael, can you share with us the impact that Leading the Way is having in the Middle East, particularly with your TV broadcast?
Right.
How is that changing hearts and minds and opening up so many Muslims to the gospel and the truth that has been essentially a region that's been dark and closed to the gospel for thousands of years?
You know, your viewers might be shocked to hear this, but the one word we hear from so many people in Arabia, in other parts of the Arab world, is thank God for ISIS. And that is, I had a beautiful young woman. She's a lawyer, and she lives in France now, but she's from Egypt. I had her speak at our church, give her testimony. And when she said, first thing she did, and she knew she was shocking people, she said, I thank God for ISIS. And I looked at the congregation and jaws are dropping. And then she went on to explain. We really did not know what our religion is until we saw what's happening, what ISIS is doing. And we began to examine our religion, and we discovered all of this stuff is there. And so they turn on the television and they hear the gospel and hear about the love of Christ, and they turn to the Lord. And this is happening over and over and over and over again. Some see vision and a dream, and then they turn on the television and they hear about Christ and the love of Christ, and they say, that's the one I saw in my dream.
Amazing.
Including some leaders in ISIS, believe it or not. And this man is an emir or prince within the ISIS movement, and people pledge allegiance to him. And he was watching that channel, and we have a streaming down in the bottom of the channel, phone numbers. If you're in Lebanon, call this number. If you're in Egypt, call this number. If you're in North Africa, call this number. And so he calls the local person, and literally his intention was to slit his throat. But then God really intervened. And bottom line is, this man now is an evangelist.
Amazing.
And he's going back to the people that he worked with, and now he's sharing Christ. And he said, well, at least now if I die, I know that I'm dying for the truth, not for an ideology.
You talked earlier about really the impact that ISIS has had on the Middle East, particularly on the Arab world. But what other factors do you think are opening up the Arab world to the gospel? Because it's been closed for so long, and
exactly.
this has been probably the most hardest region of the world to reach the gospel.
Absolutely.
What do you think? Why is God moving so powerfully now in the Middle East?
I think, here's my opinion, for what it's worth, I believe we're in the last days, and I think the Lord is gathering His elect. He's gathering His church from every corner of the globe. While in the West, many evangelicals turning their backs on the gospel, on gospel truth, on biblical infallibility of the Scripture, these people, at the risk of their own lives, turning to Christ. And that's unique in history. I know a little bit of history. That's unique. And so it convinced me, at least, that some of the signs of the end time is happening right now before our own eyes. And one of them is the most unlikely people coming to Christ, and such powerful conversion. When I was in Indonesia, I had a major crusade there in a soccer stadium. And there was a militant Muslim who ended up in prison. He saw a vision of Jesus in the prison, and now he's an evangelist. And so he was filling 3 buses every night, bringing him to the stadium. And the last night we were interviewing him. I think Mike was there, and he was my son, younger son Jonathan, was doing the interview. And he told them that the last night after they came back, 23 militants showed up at his house. And they said to him, if you take these people, if you fill those buses again, we'll kill you. And so the question was by Jonathan, you showed up with the 3 buses. He said, of course, I'm not going to be intimidated. And he said, but you're not concerned about your life? He said, no, if I die, I go to Jesus. And I can hear those words still ringing in my ear a few years later. If I die, I go to Jesus. Fearless people.
Amazing.
Literally, I think God is using them to shame us in the West when we have chosen our comfort above the gospel. And I must admit, I don't go there to preach, I go there to be encouraged by them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the West, and you're here in Britain, today with a speaking tour and other meetings, and sadly, when we look at Britain and we look at Europe, it's embraced this secular humanism to the extent that it pervades everything over everything, and we're seeing the radical decline of our Judeo-Christian heritage. We see the church sadly is in apostasy and it's lost its way. How do you think that Britain and Europe have gotten such a mess, but understanding their Christian heritage?
Well, they departed from it.
Yeah.
That's really what is happening. They departed from the truth, and once you depart from the truth, you get... I was on American television not long ago, and they asked me that same question about why is these shootings in schools. I said, look, when the Spirit of God departs, an evil spirit comes and takes its place. We know that from the life of King Saul. And the Bible said when the Spirit of God left him, he was tormented by an evil spirit. Whenever the Spirit of God is rejected, he's a gentleman. The Holy Spirit is a gentleman. And when he's rejected, when the gospel is disbelieved and rejected, an evil spirit is going to come and fill that vacuum. And whether it be militant secularist or militant Islam, either way, that's what's happening in the West. And sadly, we're not waking up in time. I pray that we do, and I pray that God will send an awakening that will bring us to the realization of what we have done. But just think about Israel. My hero in the Old Testament is Jeremiah. Believe it or not, a lot of people would say to me, when they hear me preach, and they say, I always think of Jeremiah. Besides being the weeping prophet, I tend to do that publicly, and I'm not ashamed of it. But I weep over the condition of the church. And he kept saying, it's not too late. You can still turn to the Lord. It is not too late. When you read the impassionate speeches that he was giving, turn back, or you got the Babylonian exile to look forward to. And unfortunately, in a period of 70 years, they would not turn back, and God kept his word, Babylonian exile. We have our own Babylonian exile right now. It's called militant Islam and militant Muslim. I have Muslim leaders that I've met with in the Middle East who would say to me, and these are political leaders, yeah, how come we are declaring them terrorists here and we're fighting them? In Europe, they welcome them, and they set up their headquarters in European capital. And why the State Department don't want to declare the terrorist organization? And I'm baffled, other than fear, of course. I don't understand what's going on. But this is a reality. Whenever the Spirit of God departs, a Babylonian exile, we might not be deported from the promised land to Babylon, but we are emotionally under siege and physically under siege of our own Babylonian exile, and that's Islamists.
Absolutely. So how can Christians who love the Lord, who contend for the truth, who are Bible-believing Christians, really stand in this Babylonian age?
Sure. I wrote a book called The Hidden Enemy, and the very last chapter I dedicated specifically to answer that question, Salman. I mean, the answer is this. First of all, you've got to believe the truth. You've got to believe it with all your heart. Then you have to practice it. You have to live it. Then you have to proclaim it. And unashamedly, it would be like this Indonesian former Muslim turned evangelist. If I die, I go to Jesus. But we have made life to be so comfortable. Like, C.S. Lewis said, God allowed these little inns in life so we can, get a breather, but don't settle. Don't think this is your home, because our home is heaven. And we cease to think that way. You look at the average evangelical preaching. It's how to get along with your wife, how to do this, and how to get along with your kids. And I'm not against any of this. But where is the passion for the lost? Where is the passion for holy living? Where is it? That's gone by wayside. We're motivational speakers now. We say, well, if you think positive thoughts, you can get upgraded to first class. If you think positive thoughts, you will have a Mercedes or a Rolls Royce. And we have preachers all over the television in the United States. I don't know about UK, but in the United States, who say, God gave them faith for a $60 million jet. God gave them faith for this and the other thing. It all has to do. We have one of the best-selling Christian books in America. It's called Your Best Life Is Now. Your best life is now? Then why heaven? Why would anyone think about heaven if you can have your best life is now and here? And so it's the church and it's the pastors, the preachers in the pulpits who are going to be held responsible by God, and they're going to be held accountable for the departure from the truth, because there's an adage that goes like this: as goes the pulpit, goes the pew, and goes the pew, goes the nation. And that's what we have right now, at least what I know is in the United States.
I mean, what do you think it's going to take to turn that tide around? And to the extent now that apostasy has steeped into the church, we have the prosperity gospel, which is encouraging everyone to live for now, gather as much material goods as you can. Don't worry about salvation, or don't worry about the loss. Let's just focus on getting rich. Hasn't the values of the world penetrated the church in the Western world, which is really making it ineffective?
Exactly.
There's also, church has a responsibility to not only heal society, but heal the nation through Jesus Christ, no other way.
Absolutely.
And why are we seeing a departure of such biblical truth in these days?
Well, again, my own personal views, and like I often tell the congregation, I said, this is thus says the Lord, but if I have an opinion, I always make the distinction. This is just an opinion, and you can take it as it is. I personally believe when Jesus said, toward the end of time, the love of many will grow cold. And Jesus asked the question, when the Son of Man, he talks about how bad it's going to be, and he said, when the Son of Man returns, particularly in the Gospel of Luke, will he find faith upon the earth? I mean, that is a haunting question, and to me, and I looked at what is happening and I said, that's scary, but it could be because we really are much closer to the return of Christ. That we're seeing apostasy in the church, gathering of the remnant and the faithful ones from all over the globe, even under the threat of persecution and life. And God is doing something because we're getting close to the end. And the devil, while he does not know the future, he senses that his time is coming close, and that's why he's stirring up. That's why we're moving so fast into secularism and into immorality. We're moving so fast with speed, and my take on this is the devil senses that his time is coming near, and therefore he's speeding up the process of apostasy in the church.
You've written some very insightful books, quite a few to name. I mean, Jesus, Jihad and Peace. Another one, The Barbarians Are Here. Do you think because our governments have really are to blame in the Western world, particularly in Britain and Europe, for the dismantlement of our Judeo-Christian heritage, taking God out of our schools and out of our law and out of our governments, and the extent that we have become so secular now that we don't actually have any values, and so therefore that has created a political and spiritual vacuum that has been filled by Islamic extremism. What is the level of threat, do you think, that Europe and Britain is now facing with the rise of Islamic extremism, considering that last year this nation was rocked by 3 major terrorist attacks?
Sure.
2 in this capital, in London, and 1 in Manchester.
This is all a strategy, and anybody reads Arabic and read some of the writers, you got one, on the one hand, terrorists who create fear, and then you have a government out of fear acquiesce to demands, and it's working. Their strategy, which I really read, the original paper was presented by the former president of Algeria 40 years ago, Ben Bella, and I read that paper and I couldn't believe my eyes. So I wrote a book. I wrote it under a pseudonym. It was published in London initially in 1979. And that was a long time ago, and basically to warn the Christian community. Then was published in the United States, and it was a polemic book and was deliberately written with that in mind. So I started way back. This is not new for me. I remember at the Reagan White House, people were reading it in the White House, and then invited me to come and speak to key individuals there. And they kind of looked at me and said, you mean these people are a threat to us? No, it's an evil empire, it's Russia. I said, well, yeah, I'm not against that, but there's an inherent motivation of destroying Western civilizations because they believe that God gave them the oil in order to dominate the world and bring the caliphate, the successor of the prophet, and rule the world. And one of the key leaders in the Reagan White House, later on, many years later, became a dear friend of mine. And every time we're together, we have lunch, he looks at me and he said, man, we didn't get it, did we? And I could see, because remember, I was only 32 years old, writing a book and saying, this is the danger, wake up America, wake up West. And nobody was taking me seriously. And but now, in fact, right after September 11, when everybody began to say, all right, now we see it, what's next? And so I began to write the other books, the Jesus, Jihad and Peace, Barbarians Are Here, they're not at the door, not at the gate, they're here. And I just read a very reliable statistics that said in the same period of time that 500 churches have closed in the UK, 427 mosques have opened. I mean, even if the statistics slightly wrong one way or the other, that is a very, very discouraging statistics. And so the believers who are sitting in the churches saying, well, Christians been privileged for a long time, now it's time to share it with somebody else. And I'm quoting an evangelical person who said that to me here in the UK. And I said, this is crazy. Do you understand what will this do if they really become dominant and if they rule? I mean, they are working now, they're running for political office, and they
absolutely
slowly but surely placing themselves in areas of authority. And given the birth rate, there's a book written by a Brit, it's called America Alone. He's a journalist, and he lives in New Hampshire now. But America Alone, he's saying that Europe is finished. This is his bottom line of the book. He said, now America needs to wake up. I doubt it if America is waking up, sadly. So we are in these kind of difficult days, and I'm not going to be a prophet of doom, because I know in my heart, I tell people, I've read the last chapter in the book and we win.
Absolutely.
So I have no fear whatsoever, but I'm just saying, like Jeremiah did, wake up, turn back to Christ before it's too late. And I will do that until he takes me home.
Excellent. That's good to know, and you've seen you in practice as well doing that. Michael, how much is our populations, particularly in Britain and also in Europe, being controlled by political correctness? And sadly, whenever we see a terrorist attack going off in either France or in Britain, our leaders are very quick to say that this has nothing to do with Islam, and that Islam is a religion of peace.
Right.
Do you understand where they're coming from, why they're saying this?
No, I don't. But I do understand that this is a strategy that has written long time ago by certain Islamists. And I still make the distinction between Muslims and Islamists. There are Muslims in the media in the Middle East who are pleading with Europe and saying, please don't allow them to take over. We're kicking them out of our countries. You don't let them do this because we value the West and we value Western civilizations. I heard that, and I met with them, actually, one prominent journalist in Egypt. And we had a very frank conversation, and he is Muslim. But he said Islamists are very dangerous, and Europe needs to wake up because we value Western civilization. We want Western civilization to flourish. I said, I wish I could take you with me to the West for them to hear you say that. And he is probably one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent journalist in the Middle East. And so you hear this, and then you read, of course, the Islamists, so they're writing and saying, yeah, with money pouring in, terrorism bringing fear, and then birth rate, it's a matter of time. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia said this. This is not an evangelical pastor who said this. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in the United States said this in an interview, word for word. He said, if Europe will not wake up in time, the Muslim Brotherhood will run it in 20 years' time. This was several weeks ago.
That's absolutely frightening and very, very chilling, Michael. But it's also a reality that we face today, sadly, in this nation. And after being rocked by 3 major terrorist attacks this year, it doesn't look like the government is getting to grips with this problem. And is that the problem is not actually identifying who the actual enemy is? And what role does the mainstream media play in preventing us from defeating this evil?
Well, the mainstream media is basically living in fear. They're afraid. And it was the outgoing head of BBC said so. He said that when they asked him a question in his departure, a friend of mine was there, and he told me the story. They said to him, I said, why do you beat up on Christians?
Yeah.
But then you kind of give the Islamists a pass. He said, well, it's a no-brainer. Christians have broad shoulders. This is word for word. They can take it. But if we start turning on the Islamists and start calling it for what it is, they'll be showing up on Oxford Street with guns and grenades. So fear worked and is working on both sides of the Atlantic. And I give the illustration of how we have a civil liberties union in America that will sue any kid, a group of kids who would have a Bible study either before or after school in a classroom, because they said separation of church and state. You get Muslim students demand that there'll be a little room dedicated to their prayer, demand to leave at 12 noon to have their noon prayer. The Civil Liberties Union says nothing. Fear worked, and fear is working. And that's what Christians need to come against, fear. And they need to be committing and recommitting themselves, not only to pray, because sometimes people use prayer as an excuse for not doing anything, but been committed to the proclamation of the gospel.
Absolutely. And Michael, do you think that historians will look back at this period of history and say that one of the main reasons why the West lost and came crashing down as a civilization, as a Judeo-Christian civilization, is primarily because of abortion? And the fact that so many babies have been aborted, really, in this country since 1967.
Sure.
At the extent that we need mass immigration in order to keep our economies going.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the nail in the coffin of Western civilization?
There is no doubt you're right on the money here, because even Germany, specifically Germany, is accepting all the refugees because they need workers. Because they don't have the natural population. And somebody quoted to me recently that in France, while the average Muslim couple have about 4 to 5 children, the French birth rate is below 0. And so shedding innocent blood, it doesn't settle very well with our God. And the judgment, which not everybody's seeing it, but the judgment already has begun for shedding innocent blood and for literally throwing out God's laws and placing them with man's laws. And that always happens.
And also it's important to recognise, your president, President Trump, has stood very strongly and very firmly with Israel. And we know that Israel as a nation has just celebrated her 70th anniversary as a nation that has been reborn thanks to biblical prophecy and God's promises to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. How important is Israel in this equation, and how important is it for Christians to understand God's plans for Israel and the Jewish people?
It's very interesting that I can give you I'm a sociologist by training, but I can give you from a sociological point of view, but also has biblical connotation. Israel always, in the Arab writing, all of the Arabic writing, literature and everything else, journalism, they say it's a dagger in the side of Islam. And they pointed out the country looks like a dagger in the side of Islamic world. But now, because of the Sunni Shiite division and the enmity and hatred and they kind of really at each other's throat, God is using Israel, believe it or not, in that equation, so much so that Arab countries, Sunni Arab countries, even Saudi Arabia, Egypt, of course, and Jordan, they kind of now seeing the value of Israel in its relentless warning about Iran and the Shia hegemony. So I didn't see that one coming, I must confess. But now, as I see it happening, I'm just amazed.
And your president, Donald Trump, before we talk about Jerusalem, has been very, very courageous in actually pulling the United States out of the Iran deal. And we saw probably one of the greatest episodes in espionage when the Israelis raided the Iranian nuclear facilities to the extent that they have 50,000 documents detailing Iran's nuclear weapons program, also on CD-ROMs, in which the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave his remarkable press conference. When it comes to Iran and the threat posed by Iran, not only to Israel but also to the Middle East as well, how is it that it only seems that President Trump is the only, and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are the only guys who really get this?
Yes, I think for some reason Benjamin Netanyahu is the first, to my knowledge, I may be wrong, and I think all the others were fine, but he's the first one to acknowledge the contribution of Christians toward Israel. And he commissioned a book for that purpose 3 years ago. And I think because of that understanding of biblical prophecy, but particularly thanks to Vice President Pence, who does know the Bible, understands the scripture very well, and therefore he's giving that impetus toward getting Trump to keep his word. 3 presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, promised in the campaign that they will move the embassy. All of them, once they got to the State Department, said, well, you can't do this, you're going to alienate yourself, and the Muslim world will go crazy and it will do that. So they backed off. Trump says, well, let them try. I gave my word, I keep my word. And he literally is a man who said, I am going to keep my word regardless of the cost. And what was the cost? A couple of days of blistering and huffing and puffing in some of the media in Muslim countries, and now it's a reality. Followed Guatemala and Uruguay, and many other countries are now following suit and moving their. In fact, last I heard, there were about 37 countries are now considering moving their embassies to Jerusalem.
Incredible.
It takes leadership.
Absolutely, and we have to also confront a lot of the lies, the misinformation, particularly the role of our kind of mainstream liberal media when it comes to understanding President Trump and his administration. But you said prior to us recording this program that you're personal friends with the Vice President Mike Pence. So can you share with us what God is doing in this administration and how so many prominent Christians are now in real positions of power and influence in the United States? It's incredible.
Only God could have done that. And here's the how it happened is that President Trump asked Chris Christie from New Jersey to head up the transition team. And for some reason, he dropped the ball. And this frustrated him, so he said to Mike Pence, you're on the ticket, you're the vice president, you organize the transition. And what does he do? He brings brilliant people who are committed Christians. We have 9 evangelical, Bible-believing cabinet ministers who have a Bible study every Wednesday, who open the cabinet with prayer every time they meet. And we have a vice president who is totally committed. And he says this is his own words. He said, I'm Christian first, conservative second, and Republican third. My total loyalty is to Jesus, and then the rest follows. And so you have somebody whose compass is centered, and therefore, no matter which way the wind blows, he is centered, he is focused, and he has helped keep President Trump focused as well. Because he could have been persuaded otherwise. Members of his family are not really believers, and many others trying to influence him one way or the other. But thank God that we have a vice president who is fully trusted, completely trusted by the president, and who also a man who loves God as much as you and I do.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. And my heart goes out to Mike Pence. He has such a love for the Jewish community, such a love for Israel, and that comes across, as well as one of the other rising stars in the administration, and that has to be Nikki Haley, doesn't it?
Yes, she is wonderful. And I was surprised with her appointment, because initially she did not support him, she supported Rubio. And Marco Rubio, but it really says a lot about Trump's ability to forgive and not necessarily hold grudge, because she did not support him for president. But he saw the talent, he saw the steel backbone of this Indian American. She, as you know, daughter of immigrants from India, and she was so gracious as a governor of South Carolina, did a marvelous job there. And he appointed, he actually asked her to be Secretary. She said, no, I know my experience and I'm not ready for Secretary of State, but I will do the United Nations. And look at her speeches. Every one of them, classic. I just love watching her. I love listening to her. And she's a remarkable woman, and God has plans for her, I believe. And she's another believer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've had meetings in the White House, so we're getting the first-hand account from you, Michael. What is President Trump like? And many have said that he's actually come to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Can you share something about his faith and about his walk with God, but also his ability to not care what anyone thinks about him, particularly from the liberal media, right. Despite international pressure, trying to push him to keep with the Iranian deal as an example, right. or climate change. But he's his own man, and he seems to have a real heart and love for the United States, and wants to see your nation restored to where it was before.
Well, you get two views. The self-righteous hypocrites always point to his failures and moral failures. He's the first one to tell you that his past is not all that, and it's very checkered. But I did hear from a very reliable source that he gave his life to Christ. It was really after the election. He just saw what God has done, and he said, only God could have done that. I also think even from worldly point of view, and I had two candidates for president who had personal, dear friends who were running against him at primary. So I was supporting them initially. But it took a belligerent guy who is a street fighter to be able to defeat Hillary Clinton and her agenda, which is really purely anti-Christian. But God somehow in his mercy, he called Cyrus my servant. And those who do not understand the spiritual realm say, how can God call Cyrus my servant, this Persian emperor? Well, God can use anyone to serve his purpose. And he realized, he knew, of course, that this is the only man who could do the things that need to be done to give the nation another chance. I think God gave us a chance with George Bush and he blew it. Now he has given us this chance with Donald Trump, and I believe he is Americans and I'm constantly saying this publicly, unless you see this as an opportunity, God saying, I'm going to give you another rope to hold on to so you can be pulled to safety. Don't blow it. And turn to the Lord, because He is showing you that He can use anyone. And He's using this man whom would be far from Christians, a Christian. So we are, I guess he's a polarizing figure. And he has never learned to be diplomatic or control his tongue. He's a guy who built an empire from nothing, and this is the way he thinks. And after 70, it's very hard to change, but he is making changes. Those who are close to him, they see very perceptible change in his life. So if you think of a baby Christian, he is a baby Christian, and it's taking us 40, 50 years in our walk with Christ. So imagine somebody who is just barely beginning to understand the gospel, give his life to Christ.
Incredible. So we definitely need to pray for him and his administration.
No question.
There seems to be two very interesting trends that are developing in politics, which has its implication in biblical prophecy. The first thing was really with the election victory of President Trump and his administration, really pulling the United States back from that globalist agenda that Hillary Clinton and Obama pushed the United States in that direction. Together with this nation here, with the majority of the British people voting to leave the European Union in terms of Brexit. Do you think that God is giving the nations another chance to turn back to Him before we see the world
the final
explode?
Judgment?
Exactly.
Yeah. I believe that. I believe, Simon, exactly what you're saying is right, and this could be that last gasp is like Hezekiah's reformation, and he was trying to reform the country and turn him back to God, but in the end, in that case, God said it was too late. People are not turning, and I always liken Trump to Hezekiah, maybe saying, come on, this is the last chance, let's do something. And but if people persist in their way, our exile is coming.
I also want to discuss with you the importance of Israel in the end times, because what's happening with Israel is quite extraordinary in the sense that so many of her Arab neighbours are reaching out to Israel. For example, your nation, Egypt, with General President Sisi, the Jordanians, and also the Saudis are now even calling for normalization of relations with Israel, despite the fact that this gave birth to Wahhabism and this extreme form of Islamic fundamentalism that has affected the world. Why do you think we're seeing these changes taking place? Is it because of the threat of Iran, or is it because there's a realization that Israel is the only stable nation in the Middle East?
I think both, but then there's a spiritual component to it. Is that God serving His purpose, and He's working His purpose out. And the one thing that so many people don't know is the growth of the Messianic movement in Israel. I mean, there are very few people really, when I talk to them, they have no idea. And thanks to Netanyahu, he allowed that to give them the freedom. There was a government in one stage that was really clamping down on Messianic Jews. But there's so many Jews are coming to the Yeshua al-Mashiach, and I've been to service. I've preached in a Messianic congregation in Israel. It's one of the greatest experiences of my life. When there, for 40 minutes, they just sang to Jesus, Yeshua al-Mashiach, for 40 minutes. And it just reminded me of how probably the first church was in the first century, with all Jews, all worshiping Jesus on Saturday, and they were totally committed to Him. And so that is something should not be really lost on a Christian community in the West. The believers, they need to be praying for them and need to be supporting the government, because Governor Netanyahu is supporting them. And this is an issue that so many of my Jewish friends in America don't even understand. They don't even support Israel. And I debate with them. I have neighbors of prominent Jewish families, and they could not understand why I'm supporting Netanyahu. I said, because he is the first prime minister, in my judgment. Menachem Begin was a great man, but Netanyahu understands the neighborhood better than any leader. And these were great people, Isaac Shamir and Rabin and Shimon Peres. They're all great people. But Netanyahu is the first prime minister who really understands what the score is. And he reads and comprehends and stays informed. And consequently, he takes a strong stand. And for that, they don't like. An Egyptian paper, believe it or not, was very critical of Hamas for sending people and telling them, oh, the Israelis won't shoot at you, just go. I mean, deliberately put them up at the firing line. And so when they died, they blamed Israel. Well, how are you going to invade a nation and not face the consequences? Because Hamas leadership lied to the people and they used them as a fodder.
Michael, you're here in London. I don't know how long you're here, but it's great to have you here. Do you have a message for our Christian viewers who are maybe struggling in the times in which we're living in, the spiritual attacks? The fact is that the society and also our nation is turning against God and turning against godly principles to the extent now that there is only a small remnant really who really believe in the Bible, who understand God's plans and purposes in the days in which we're living in. What message of wisdom do you have for them to help them stand and prepare for the days that are coming? I
humbly say to every Bible-believing Christian in America that is going to a church that is preaching heresies and apostasy and the watering down of the gospel, get out. Get out quickly. Find a Bible-believing church and join it. And then unite in prayer. Because, and I say this in the States, my colleagues heard me say it many times. I said, around election time, our prayer meetings are packed. 2 weeks later, not so much. Everybody gone back to happy. Do you think God looking down from heaven and saying, oh yeah, that's good. Glad you prayed. Now I'm glad you left me. No. It's like everybody quotes 2 Chronicles, if my people humble themselves and pray and seek my face, and they're good at this. They don't go to the next verse. He said, my eyes are on you. I'm watching you. I'm going to see what you're going to do. And so we need to give up this hypocrisy, and we need to make prayer to be the central focus of our life, our commitment to the proclamation of the gospel to be the focus of our lives, and stop faulting between two opinions like Elijah said on Mount Carmel. If God is God, then worship him. If Baal is God, you go and worship him. It's time now for that call to be totally committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. He did not bless us so that we can sit on our blessed assurance and do nothing. He blessed us so that we may take those blessings and turn them into his kingdom work and glory.
Absolutely. Michael, can you share with us how our viewers can watch your programs, listen to your wonderful broadcast on Leading the Way?
Well, the website is LTW. It's for Leading the Way. We made it easier. LTW.org. And they can download the app for free. I have a man in Arizona send me a very nice check and said to me, he said, I want to tell you why I'm sending you this support. It's because you don't charge anything for everything you put out. And he said, God laid it on my heart to become a partner with you. So everything we have is for free. The gospel is free. You download the app. I was in the White House at the National Day of Prayer. Several of the journalists on the rope, there's a rope where all the journalists were, and a Fox News reporter yelled at me, Dr. Youssef. And at the end of the meeting, as I'm walking out, and then all of these journalists, kind of 2-3 of them recognized me from television. And he was saying to them, he said, now guys, this is how you download his app. He said, I start my day every morning and it is free. And all the White House reporters, basically hearing this commercial. But this man was telling me, I do not start a day without watching your app. He said, it really strengthened me for the day, and I'm able to face whatever I'm facing. And so all our apps are free. Our books are only for donations and not for sale through Leading the Way, but in the bookstores, of course, I have no control over that. So you go to ltw.org and org, and then you get all the information.
Dr. Michael Youssef, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity today to interview you. You really are God's champion. You've championed the gospel. You are a man of stature and moral clarity, and I thank God for your life and the ministry that He's given you, and the fact that you are bringing, through God's help, through the power of Lord Jesus Christ, so many to faith, particularly in the Middle East.
Thank you, Simon, so much.
It's
really my pleasure. And I want to tell your viewers, as if the Lord lays it on your heart, pray for me, because I am lifted on the wings of the saints' prayer of the saints. And so I need all the prayers I can get, and I want God to continue to use me.
Absolutely, and may the Lord continue to give you strength, and may you go to strength to strength.
Amen. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.